This is camera number 1. Now I've been working to get all the cameras up to the same state you saw with camera number 3. I went to put the front on this, and this shaft had come out of its position, which normally they can't do, which was a puzzle, and there was absolutely no way I could get that thing seated again with all the obstructions of the rangefinder gear and the meter cord and so forth in place. So I took all those off, stripped this right back down, found that I could seat that easily enough in position, and I was left wondering, well, how did it come to fall out of place? Because normally it's held back by a tab on this bracket, that tab you see there. Well, I told you this was an early example, and there's the bracket. It has no such tab. There's nothing there to keep this gear from lifting forward, and once it's out of the pin on the back of it is out of the hole, it's extremely difficult to get the thing centered back up again. So that was another difference between the earliest examples like this one and the main production. That what they'd done was make a cut in this bracket and bend that out so that this tab at the end bears against this washer on the front of that gear and keeps it positioned. So as a result of that, I've now got virtually everything out of the camera, and I've got to put it all back again. So that was a wee hiccup. I wasn't counting on that. It was a wee hiccup with the other camera too, but I'll tell you about that another time. Well, with the front back on the camera, everything working, I need to set the lens mount to film plane distance. So how I do that, we need to register off the film plane. What I've got here is a pressure plate that I've taken out of another camera. Just machined away these spots here because these pads on the camera are actually higher than the film plane, and that's just so that this plate will sit down on the rails exactly as the film would. And it just gives me a place to measure from. So put that in there, cock the camera, set the shutter to B. Got a locking cable release so it'll hold the shutter open, and you can see the adapter I've got on the caliper, and what we're looking for is 47.6 millimeters from memory, and what I'm seeing there is 47.76. I'll just measure that in a couple of places, make sure that it's much the same, 47.75. Now where you're measuring from, you see these brass areas here, that's the surface you're measuring from to the film plane, down in there. So I'll tighten these screws. That one wasn't even tight. About a quarter of a turn, and I'll check again. $47.69, 47.68, 47.69. So pretty even, but the distance between the lens mount and the film plane's too big. We've got our washers under here as cupped washers, dished washers. Let's give these a quarter of a turn each. and I'll test again. 47.62, 47.61. So I'll take it across here and I'll measure as close to this face as I can and as close to that face as I can. That'll give me a measure from side to side. 47.6, 47.62. So we're right about here, high here. So probably we'll need to tighten the screws on this side and probably slacken them slightly on that side. Once you get this close, the amount you have to move the screws is very small. $47.61, 47.62. $47.6, 47.6. So I'm pretty good in this axis. I want to check across here now. Now we've only got really sort of 3 and a bit brass pads here, so you're not going to get as good a checking as you'd like. And there's also a pin at that point which sits above the plate. So you've got to be careful you haven't got the tool resting on that. $47.59 I'm getting there. I'll move it as close to the top as I can. 47.59, and at the bottom 47.6. So possibly my 2 top screws are slightly tight. $47.6, 47.6. $47.6, 47.6. Okay, so that lens mount to film placement distance is now correct, and we're done with that little task. So that's actually, this is the 4th of the cameras I've actually done that task on, but you only needed to see it once. Now I can put the front rings on here and get them all correctly coupled up. I've got my meter sitting where I expected it to be. Hopefully I haven't disturbed anything at this point, and we'll get the rings in place. I'll take the shutter speed settings ring. I've given that a wipe of molybdenum paste through this area. That notch is where it couples to the tab on the shutter. So that sits in there like that, and we've got this sitting in the B position. This ring goes on here. Now these rings have already been cleaned and lubricated, something I did when I was first checking the camera to see if we could sort out the problem with the stiff adjustments. And then this just sits on. Now there's a notch in here which couples up with the position of the pin there. and the red dot should be at the top. That looks like it. Now that fell into place very easily, unusually easily. It's not usually as smooth as that. Usually you've got to end up doing a bit of a wriggle with it to get it to seat. That went very well. I've got 3 screws. These are chrome plated and they're easily damaged. If you've got one that looks a little bit ugly as a result of slipping with a screwdriver, of course it wouldn't have been you, it would have been someone previous to your attempts, put it in this position at the top, because the screw in that position at the top, you can put a blob of red paint on that. It makes it a much more obvious as the spot you align your lens when you're installing the lens. Little red dot on the mount there is a little bit subtle. But if you cover the screw head with red paint at the top there, no one can see what terrible things have happened to it. Okay, so I've got the shutter speed rings and so forth back on the camera, and I'll just check that my click stops work nicely and this is all moving smoothly. So if I set the shutter speed there, I can turn the wheel. We're shifting the meter of course, but we're also shifting the aperture. And the shutter speeds rings should move through their full range of motion, right from 250 seconds, I think that is, at f22 to the other end, which is at 500th of a second. So that's all looking pretty good. And that leads us to the next task, and the next task is to connect the meter cord up to the meter once that's been set correctly so that it reads correctly for a known light source. So our next task is to connect the meter drum up, get the cord locked into the meter drum. So I have to say this process can be a bit fraught because it's not unknown for the cord to break when you're trying to wrestle it into place. And of course, if that happens, the front's got to come back off the camera. You've got to put everything back where it was with a new cord. But we'll start on this one. This one here is camera number 3. And hopefully it'll go smoothly. We can only hope. So I can see I've only got 2 screws in the top cover here. Now I've got a calibrated light source, which is a fancy way of saying it's a box with a light bulb in it, mirrors, diffusion screen, things of that nature. And it has a light meter that swings across the front so you can check the output, and assuming that the light meter there reads correctly, you know what the output is on the ground glass at the front, or the translucent glass at the front, and your meter should read the same thing. So what do I want to do? We can lift the top off. I'll set this to suit my setup, so I'll just change my film speed. I'm just pressing down the the disc there in the centre. As I turn this, doing the same thing that the chrome button would do if you were using it. And I know from experience I've got to set my shutter speed there and the aperture to somewhere around there, and that should match my light source. Now it means that when my light source is set up there, I think that's EV13. So my yellow pointer, the follower needle, should lie directly over the white needle being the one that's driven by the meter. So I will go away and check on my light source, check that's correct. Now if I need to make any adjustments, because the cord's not tied into the drum yet, all I have to do is turn the drum like this until my follower needle lines up over my white meter needle, and then that position will be set, and we can go to the business of getting the cord connected up. So I'll just go and check this and come back. Now if you haven't got a light source, and you probably don't, there's two options. If you've got a nice light coloured plain wall, you can use another camera's meter to measure the light coming back from it, what the exposure would be, and you'd set your meter here, make sure it's set to the same film speed, and you'd check until you had the correct readings here. What you would do, say for example you had, I don't know, perhaps you were using your phone to tell you what, you can get light meter apps for phones. Perhaps you were using that to see what the exposure should be, and it told you it would be, say, a 60th, well it won't say that, it'll say 125th at f5.6 for example. Well, you'd set your camera here to 125th f5.6, hold your camera to the light source, the one you've just measured, and the white needle will be registering that light intensity. And all you need to do is turn your drum until the follower needle lines up correctly over the white needle. And at that point, the exposure on this camera will match your phone. Anyway, I'm away to go and check this. I'm happy that's reading correctly. I just had to turn my meter until everything lined up where I expected it to. Now I need to mark this, because where you connect the cable up isn't necessarily in a convenient spot. So I'm just going to run a black mark across there. And that way I can see that the cord hasn't moved relative to the drum. And then I can wind the wheel on the bottom of the camera around until my meter comes to where I need it to be. And right here, I'll zoom you in for this. Right here you can see two notches. That's where the gap is, the slots are in that drum. Now what I have to achieve is to take the lower cord, lift it up over the top, park it up here, out of the way. The upper cord, then I've got to tuck it down into those two slots so that the cord comes around, along, under, back out and around, and then put the lower cord goes back down. The one we parked at the top comes back down and it goes in the lower position. So it's a little bit fraught. This camera, you can see that the cord is green. That's one of the ones I've replaced. That's not the original brown silk cord. This is some synthetic, probably Kevlar. It has the advantage this stuff really is unbreakable. I shouldn't have any problems. But it's a different story with the old ones. Anyway, we'll get this set up ready to work on. Alright, so as I've said, we need to move the cord that's in the bottom position down here up over the top out of the way. So I've got a sewing needle here that I'll use to get between those two cords and lift that up, and I've got a toothpick there, and I'm holding my finger on the top of the meter because it's easy to dislodge the meter, and there I've pushed that cord up over the top out of the way. It's very easy to dislodge the meter. If you dislodge the meter, you lose the tension on the meter, and if you lose the tension on the cord, well then the cord will come off the pulleys down inside the camera. You'll have to take the front off the camera and put everything back. You don't want to be doing that, so be very cautious about poking and prodding at this without supporting it. So our lower cord, well the one that's in the lower position at the moment, and it's normally the upper cord, the upper coil, we need to get that down into those grooves. So I'm taking my sewing needle again, and I'll just lever that over the top, and it's just sitting there at the moment, and I'm going to see if I can manipulate that into that groove. Of course that toothpick must be made out of hard rhubarb. It immediately snapped on me. And the same at this end. I need to get this cord manipulated into that groove. You may need to do this with two toothpicks at the same time, which of course is awkward if you're trying to hold the meter in position as well. There you are. I've got that cord neatly in position, and now all I need to do is bring my other cord back down into position. So a bit of poking and prodding. That's it. That's seated. So now the cord is trapped into the drum, and everything should be good. We shouldn't be losing any settings. Everything should be set nicely. Leastways, that's it all in theory. So at this stage, that's all looking very good. So that was camera number 3. I'm going to pop the top cover back on there now because I'm absolutely paranoid of knocking that meter out of position and having to go back and put everything back again. And if you're not concerned about that yet, you probably will be once it's happened to you. The ease at which you can dislodge that meter and the ease with which you can break the cord when you're trying to get it notched into that notch is something you don't have to deal with, because as soon as you make a mess of it, you're going to have to open the whole camera up again at the front, go through all the business of setting the lens plane up, lens mount to film plane distance, all of that stuff, and go around the houses and do it all again. I'll get this screw in the end housing and then put this camera to one side. We'll have a go with camera number 1 next. That could be different. So here's camera number 1, and I'm going to go through the same steps again. Remove the top cover. I know what shutter speed and so forth I'm going for. Now I will depress the centre of the meter here with the tip of my tweezers while I'm turning the wheel on the base of the camera to get this to the film speed I want to match my settings, which is there. I'll change my shutter speed and aperture settings to where I want this to be to match my light source. And I'm expecting it to be there initially. And I'll go away and check on my light source. And once I've got my meter aligned correctly with the white needle, I can go through the business of getting the cord connected at the back of the camera. Right, I've got that set, and I'm fortunate that here I'm dealing with two cameras that have Kevlar cords on them. The other cameras, the other two that I've got there, I was using the existing cord on both of those. One, it went very well. The other one, I got to the point where I was tucking the cord in at the bottom here and it snapped. And then of course I had to open the camera all the way back up, replace the cord and start again. So let's get this piece done anyway. So again, I'll mark the cord and the drum together so that I can be sure that I don't move one relative to the other. I'll use the wheel on the bottom of the camera to roll this around until I can see those two notches. There they are. Okay, and I'll do the same again. So I'll get under the lower cord, and here I've got my finger on the top of the meter so that it's not inclined to push off the camera as I'm pushing on the cord. Get my sewing needle under the cord at that point, bring it down there. Now I want to see if I can manipulate that into place. Now it would have been a very nice design touch if all these edges had been deburred and were nice and blunt. But that's not what we get. What we get is what we've got. Those edges are relatively sharp, and particularly with the original cord, it's easy to break them. Now throughout all this action here, I'm holding this meter down firmly onto the camera with my finger. Okay, so that's one's done too, and that one went pretty good, I'd say. So with that camera done, I'll put my top cover back on there, put the screws in it, at least one at each end, and next I want to move on to cleaning rangefinders.